So I found this lawnmower using an app on my phone, and at first I thought it hit the jackpot. That was until I saw it in person. You really can't tell much from pictures, and even though it only looked dirty, you really can't tell much else about it. But after looking at it for a good minute, I'm gonna have to take back everything nice I said about it. And that's because the outlook for this lawnmower is looking pretty grim. In today's video, we're going to be looking at this Troy-Bilt lawnmower, and the problem is that it has so many things wrong with it that we should probably just use it for parts. So what are some of the problems with it then? Well, where do we start at? The most obvious problems is that the cables are crunchy, and in fact the one for the self-propel is stuck. The next issue is that this mower does not want to roll backwards because the wheels get stuck. So I've never seen this happen to this brand of mower before other than to a Honda, so this should be interesting. So the next problem is a very serious one because there seems to be an oil leak coming from the engine, which is probably what sidelined this mower to begin with. But the worst part is that this mower really isn't even that old. However, if you neglect a mower, it doesn't take long for it to start having some major problems. Now the underside does look pretty bad as far as rust goes, but at least the blade is not damaged. So I do want to try and start this engine, but after checking the oil level, it confirms what we saw with the oil leak. So to do it safely, we need to put some temporary oil in it because there's a good chance it's just going to leak out anyways. There's also plenty of mystery gasoline in the fuel tank, so we might as well try and start it. And of course it's not going to start for us. That means we'll need to give it some fuel, and if it runs for a couple of seconds, we'll continue with the repair. So this is not very good news, but before we start looking any deeper, I want to try and keep the choke open and see if that helps out any. So the good news is that it started and ran, and that means we have a fuel system problem to fix. But the bad news is that it means we get to continue on with this repair. Now the reason why I'm not more enthusiastic about it is because what we find just keeps getting worse. Now I know we just put this used oil into the engine, but we've got to get it back out so that we can find our oil leak. There's also another hint of trouble when we try and take the blade off the adapter because it was pretty stuck to it. Now if this happens to you, be very careful because you could get hurt with that rusty blade. We'll then take off both cables so that way we can get them unstuck and working again, and hopefully avoiding having to pay for new ones. Now because of the condition of this lawnmower, I want to see how bad it is under the top cover. Now luckily it's not that bad, but it doesn't make up for all the work that we're going to have to do. Now the guard for the muffler was loose because of some broken mounts, and to keep it from rattling, we're going to just take it off. And since we do want the self-propel to work, we'll need to disconnect the other end of the cable from the transmission. Now you might be saying to yourself,
"Hey, aren't you going a bit overboard taking this mower apart?"
And the answer would be yes I am, but only because we have to. There are so many problems with this lawnmower that the only part we won't be taking off is the handlebar. I also hope that with the front plastic gone, you get a sneak peek at the problem with the drive system. That's when it should be pretty clear as to the reason why you shouldn't leave your stuff outside. Now to help free up those cables, the first step is to try and clean the stuff that's inside them that's keeping them from working like they should be. And for that part, I'm going to use my ultrasonic cleaner. However, there are multiple ways to clean them before adding any type of lubricant to them. Now while the cleaner is running, I'm also going to try and clean up this mower and the deck. And of course, this is something that you obviously don't need to do, but since we have this opportunity, I am going to take it. So if you are going to try and wash your lawnmower, try your best to not get any water into the muffler or the air filter area, but a tiny amount of water isn't the end of the world. So I find it best to just let it air dry after washing it, but if you're short on time, a leaf blower will help out a lot too. Now because of my hectic schedule, I just waited until the next day, and as you can see, it looks a whole lot better than before. So on this particular mower, the reason why the wheels won't spin backwards is because the drive shafts are rusted in place much like it does on Hondas. And you can also tell that because if you activate the self-propel by hand, the pulley will get stuck, confirming that the drive shafts need some serious attention. And you don't need much convincing to see that the shafts are indeed covered in rust, which is what's holding them in place. Now the most likely reason this has happened is that this mower must have been left in the grass for a really long time. So yes, you can leave your stuff outside. However, if it's done the wrong way, something like this could happen to it. Next comes the hard part, which is taking this engine apart to find out why it's leaking oil. However, there's a pretty good chance that the gasket for the lower part of the engine is the part that's leaking. So because of all the rust that's covering the blade adapter and pretty much the rest of the lawnmower, this adapter was going to put up a fight. Now believe me, this 2-jaw puller or any other kind of puller is worth the money. And that's because if I didn't have one, I really don't know how I would have taken this blade adapter off. We'll have to clean off the rust from not only the inside of the adapter, but also the shaft as well. Because if we don't, when we take off the lower part of the engine, we could damage the oil seal. Now to be honest, we probably should replace the oil seal. However, if we don't damage it, then we don't need to replace it. Just be sure to take out all the fasteners and keep them somewhat organized before you try to persuade it to come loose, otherwise you could damage it. Also, take your time, and if it does get stuck, try lubricating the shaft again. So this is the oil sump, and this is the gasket that seals it to the rest of the engine, and for some reason, it's broken here. Now your guess is as good as mine as to why that happened, but there's really nothing left to do except clean up all traces of the old gasket and replace it. So here comes the fun part, and by that, I mean all the cleaning we have to do. This is nothing more than cleaners and elbow grease because wishing for stuff doesn't work here. And if you do the best you can cleaning off the old gasket, the better chance that it won't leak there again. I also took the opportunity to put a coat of paint on some of the places where it was beginning to come off. Now I did this mainly for cosmetic reasons, although it's supposed to help with cooling as well. And before we start to put the engine back together, make sure the timing marks line up on both the black cam gear and the larger camshaft gear. Next will be the oil slinger and governor, but just make sure it's making contact with this arm. After that, we'll then install a paper gasket, but just make sure you order the right one for your engine. So I'm going to do something a bit extra, and that is to apply some oil to the post for the camshaft and also the crankshaft. The reason why is because I want to make it easier to install the oil sump back onto the engine, and doing this will help out a lot. Now you're welcome to skip this part as it's just me being overly concerned, which some viewers may not be. So when installing this part, make sure that it's seated against the block before trying to tighten the bolts down. Otherwise, if it gets bound up because it's not lined up, you could damage the engine. Also, before you try and tighten the bolts down, especially if you're using a power tool, make sure you start them by hand first. Because if you don't, you risk damaging the threads and making your day a whole lot longer. We'll then finish off the bolts with a torque wrench, but from what I understand, this is not a race car, but just a lawnmower. So next up is fixing the self-propel, and to be honest, I'd rather be dealing with an engine rebuild than tackling this job. So what's the plan then? Well, basically, we have to take the wheels off and then remove the transmission, but with the drive axle stuck, that's where we're going to struggle with it. Now to take out the transmission, we'll need to take off the gears at the ends, which can be a bit of a struggle. You're going to need to find a way to keep the axles from spinning, which in this case was already taken care of. Just remember to keep the parts you take off the machine organized, that way it'll be easier to put back on. I'm going to let you know that this is not going to be a delicate procedure, and believe me, I tried. However, they were so badly stuck that nothing but brute force was going to work. So this is not the way you're supposed to take these parts off, but it seemed right at the time. But I'm very certain that if the drive shafts weren't stuck to their sleeves, we wouldn't have to use a mallet. This, however, is where the mallet comes into play, but I do have to tell you that these sleeves are not cheap despite being made out of plastic. And if you do break one of these, you're going to find out, so try and be as careful as you can. Basically, what I'm doing is pushing and pulling the sleeve on the shaft until it comes loose, and it was not a fun process at all. But after a couple of Red Bulls, we finally managed to take one of them off. Now I'm not going to show you the other side, but it was pretty much the same process. So after an hour of struggling and cleaning and some paint, it now looks like this. All I did was clean off the rust from the drive shafts, give it a coat of paint, and then applied an oil to the ends to keep them from rusting until we can get it back into the mower. Now this is how I'm choosing to prep the transmission, but you're welcome to try it your own way. But as you can tell, the sleeve is able to slide onto the shaft and it's able to spin quite freely now. But we're also going to add a bit of grease to keep it that way and hopefully avoid this problem in the future. So this is when the fun begins, and that's putting all the clean parts back onto the mower. However, there is some bad news though. Because of all the problems with this project, it took a lot more time than normal. And that means we'll have to pick this project back up when we have more time. It's sad to say it, but sometimes the carb is not the only problem. Sometimes it's a lot worse than that. So my question is, would you have even started this project realizing that more than likely you'd have to touch every major system on it? We're talking about the fuel system, drive system, and even opening up the engine itself. Because for some viewers, that's a good enough reason to buy a new mower. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.